Okay, thank you, Stephen. It's on now. An echo?
Okay, we're good.
It's gone.
Eric, you want to maybe start introductions and we'll go around this way?
Yes, Erica Kropp, work for Deschutes County as Deputy County Administrator.
Barry Winters, City Attorney.
Ariel Mendez, he, him, Ben City Councilor.
Megan Norris, she, her, Ben City Council.
Tony Deschutes County Commissioner. Anthony Broadman.
Patty Dare, Deschutes County Commissioner.
Melanie Keebler, she, her. I'm the mayor of Bend.
Bill Chang, Deschutes County Commissioner.
Megan Perkins, she, her, Ben City Councilor.
Mike Riley, he, him, Bend City Councilor.
Eric King, City Manager of Bend.
Nick Lilac, County Administrator.
You all? Okay, so we begin with, it looks like the city of Bend has an update.
Yeah, for our growth plans for both the city and the county. So
Mm.
we want Brian and Nicole up to the table, I think. That's not Nicole.
Okay, well, what are you doing? We said Nicole.
Wish you.
Where is she?
Oh, that's
Oh.
too bad.
Devastated not be.
I know
Okay,
she does,
okay.
and we love having her.
Brian, go ahead.
Righty. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. Hello, Commission and Council. Brian Rankin, I'm a senior strategist, and we're here to do a quick overview of a growth management strategy that was recently presented to the City Council. The City Council gave us a go-ahead, and we're going to get into it. So let's start. And apologies for folks, we're used to bigger screens, a little bit bigger screens in council chambers. I'll try my best to kind of explain the graphics if you can't see them very well. So let's talk about a growth management strategy. As we all know, we're all in a rapidly growing county, rapidly growing city. We're facing growth pressures, I think, across the board in both the county and the city. And so we are really excited to start on a new growth management strategy within the city of Bend. And just to highlight that any growth management strategy must naturally, for the city of Bend, must naturally include the county. There are particular actions. If you think about it, a lot of our major infrastructure is located in the county, the wastewater treatment facility, our water treatment facility, of course, all the county roads leading into the city. The infrastructure is important. And then some of the actions we'll talk about today, including an urban growth boundary expansion and an urban reserve, those all require, and a one-time UGB addition, all require county action as well. So we're in this together. And so I think it's important to share the strategy with you and provide some time for questions. So we're going to talk about three different topics today. So apologies for bouncing around, but we don't have this opportunity very often. A one-time UGB addition, which is kind of a short-term turnaround way to address growth pressures, a 20-year growth plan, which is a more traditional examination of our longer term, kind of longer to midterm needs, and then urban reserves, which goes out beyond an urban growth boundary. So we'll talk about all three of these today. I'll cover each one and then show you a schedule at the end to show you some of the timelines that are involved in this work. Okay, so each one of these different projects has a different focus and a different intended outcome. The overall intent is to manage growth and provide some mechanisms to address growth to the year 2045 and then beyond. So the one-time UGB addition is kind of highlighted with a little blue dot in the map, and that's illustrative. And that's simply a one-time addition of land to the urban growth boundary. It may not be where that blue dot is located, but it's just to show you there's a one-time, one site, one location to potentially add land to our urban growth boundary, predominantly for housing. The 20-year land supply and climate-focused growth plan is going to look both inside of our existing urban growth boundary and beyond in terms of providing additional capacity for housing and employment growth, and focus on a number of other subjects that I'll get into. The timeline for that kind of plan goes out to about a target year of 2045. And then urban reserves is another type of process that would allow us to address growth and particularly land supply in a time frame beyond that 20-year horizon, which would go from 2055 to potentially up to 2075. Let's get into some of the details about the one-time urban growth boundary expansion. So what is this one-time UGB addition? This originated from Senate Bill 1537, and 1537 was passed in the last legislature, and it allows a one-time UGB addition. So the addition would be for up to 100 net residential acres for housing. The city has to meet some need criteria, which we do currently meet. And then part of this is essentially a process to do a concept plan for that 100 acres. And then that concept plan has to demonstrate a number of different, it has to meet a number of different requirements. I think most notably is levels of affordability. So about 30% of those units have to be more affordable than your traditional market rate housing. In addition, the bill allows and calls for more supporting multimodal development patterns, having some supportive commercial services and things like that. So there are some requirements in that bill that we have to meet. So let's talk about site eligibility and where. This is one site out of a number of potential sites around the current urban growth boundary. So this map that is on the right shows you the kind of the universe of possibilities when it comes to what that site could be. It would be one out of all of these sites that are shown on the map, or some combination of these sites. It's not all of them, it would just be one of them. It has to be, like I said, around 100 net residential acres. And the land has to be adjacent or contiguous to the urban growth boundary. Cannot be resource land. So it has to be on exception land. And that map shows some of those candidate sites. And we know full well that most of these sites are probably not good candidates. A number of those, if you look at it, Broken Top, for example, you'll see some parkland picked up. Those are not naturals for this. And we do not anticipate that those sites would be even interested in coming into the urban growth boundary to develop for housing. Let's talk about there's a process piece and the next steps. We've already started on this process. We've called for site applications, and we have held kind of an open house where we explained this process, explained the requirements to a number of different landowners. And I think it was interesting to note there were a number of different landowners that were there. So there were at least, I'd say, 10, 15 different people in the audience who were interested in this process. Site applications. So this is where the city says, all right, we want to do this process. Please apply if you're interested. So this is not something where the city goes out and affirmatively says, this is going to be the area we bring in. We're kind of in a receptive mode saying, we want to do this process. We want to do this project. Who's interested? And then folks will submit an application. So that concept plan, which will show kind of how that development would take place, the location, the densities, the housing mix and the type, and you get an idea of what that would look like. Those are due in October. And then in November, December, there will be a public process to take a look at those sites, have some discussions with our city council, and city council ultimately selecting the best of the sites that apply. After that, the concept plan will get refined through a process with city staff and the applicant. Ultimately, next summer, the hope is there will be an adoption process where the city would adopt a concept plan into its comprehensive plan, expand its urban growth boundary, and then that urban growth boundary expansion would come to the county for approval. And in this sense, it's not a land use decision. It would just be, it's a hearing for you to expand that urban growth boundary, make sure that we have our comprehensive plans more or less consistent. And then after that, that readies the site for future annexation, master planning, and then ultimately development in the coming years. All right, we're going to switch gears here, shift over to the 20-year growth plan. All right. Apologize for going hard copy here. I don't have a computer. So we have a 20-year growth plan. What will this plan achieve? This plan will achieve a couple different, I would call them kind of addressing different pillars associated with managing growth and also meeting our regulatory compliance requirements the state of Oregon has established for cities under a number of different new laws. So our plan is to involve our community in guiding our future, to support housing and employment needs, provide sustainable transportation systems in a changing climate and world with high quality public infrastructure. So these 5 pillars are all going to be addressed more or less simultaneously. Instead of doing these things in a more sequential order, we're planning on tackling all these subjects all at once to meet multiple regulatory requirements established by the state of Oregon at the same time. Let's talk about the deliverables of this work. When it comes to the engagement, equity and community engagement side, we're going to create an equity-focused engagement plan. So you can expect events, pop-ups, surveys, educational materials, et cetera, focus groups to help us learn what the community wants, expects, and what they're hoping for in the creation of this plan. And I want to compliment the county on its public engagement for their comprehensive plan. We've been taking a close look at that. Good job. And I think there are a number of things that we can learn from your efforts. So thank you. In terms of some of these other deliverables, we have an economic opportunities analysis that will guide economic development in the city of Bend's urban growth boundary for the next 20 years, essentially a land supply for economic development embodied in that report. Housing capacity analysis and housing production strategies do the same for housing, which is essentially trying to say how much capacity do we have to support expected population growth and housing need? And then what are strategies the city must adopt to provide more affordable housing and produce the housing that is required to meet the needs of our community. Also a buildable lands inventory. Now, those all sum up to whether or not we're going to need a UGB expansion, urban growth boundary expansion or not. Our preliminary thinking and some analysis suggests we will need some form of an urban growth boundary expansion amounting to, and then the hundreds of acres between say 200 and 700, but we can't confirm that until the state gives us our housing numbers expected at the beginning of this next year. We're also going to update our transportation systems plan to comply with the new climate-friendly and equitable communities rules, integrate our climate action plan into our comprehensive plans to make sure that we have land use, transportation, and climate strategies all closely aligned. And of course, we're going to take a close look at our public facilities plans to make sure that we have the infrastructure to support the kind of land use pattern that we're establishing through this plan. Okay, and switching gears again, stay with me. Urban reserves. Urban reserves are a tool to manage growth in the longer term. So urban reserves are areas outside of what will be a newly adopted urban growth boundary expansion to provide land for growth in an additional 10 to 30 years beyond that 20-year urban growth boundary. So it's both for housing and jobs, and it's beyond that 20-year time horizon in the typical UGB expansion. And then the advantage of having reserves is that you expand into those reserves before you go into other areas that are outside of the current urban growth boundary. So it makes it much more efficient for us to expand in the future. And then also, I think one of the major advantages is you can take a closer look at infrastructure needs and do more infrastructure planning in those areas. It also protects those lands for urbanization in the future. So it makes it more efficient, easy to urbanize over time. Where would this take place? This take place, essentially, we're going to analyze areas outside of a future UGB that gets potentially expanded in the future. So you typically establish a buffer, you analyze those areas. These lands are currently all under the county's jurisdiction, and as you know, are designated either rural, residential, exclusive farm use, or potentially forest use as well. How does this get done? Well, these are the basic steps. First of all, you kind of establish a time horizon for your urban reserves. So you have to make a decision. Are you going 10 years beyond your urban growth boundary? You could go potentially up to 30. So that's a big decision. Of course, there is a public process with urban and rural stakeholders and landowners, the city and the county, but you're essentially extending those forecasts. You're saying, okay, this is how much we plan to grow in terms of housing and employment over that next 10 to 30 years. Therefore, you need about this much land. We'll also coordinate with other service providers like parks and schools to take care of those uses as well. We evaluate potential areas, we coordinate with the county, and then we do some high-level infrastructure planning because in my view, efficient infrastructure and providing that efficient infrastructure is really, really critical when you're establishing that urban reserve because eventually you will be moving into that. You want to make sure you're creating urban reserves in a place that can be served with infrastructure more efficiently. We ultimately would end up amending our city and county comprehensive plans, and then we would have to adopt some management agreements between the city and county and special districts for the administration of that urban reserve. Here's some timelines and deliverables. So kind of phase one, as I mentioned, is that one-time UGB addition. That work is already underway, and we expect to wrap that up by the end of 2025. Right now, our department or our division, excuse me, is working on doing a request for proposals or an RFP. We're having discussions with the city council on project governance. Essentially, we'll launch kind of phase 2 of this overall strategy sometime next year, probably early to mid next year, and that will take a number of years to finish. What we expect is by the end of 2026 to do some adoptions of some of the fundamental documents, a buildable lands inventory, an employment opportunities analysis, housing capacity analysis, say this is what we need, get that adopted, and then move to the next phase, which is establishing your urban growth boundary or a new boundary, and then adopting a transportation systems plan with that. And then there's a decision here on whether or not we go forward with urban reserves. So I think that decision, as we've talked with our council, is you make that decision somewhere around the end of 2026. So we can couple that work with our urban expansion work if needed. And so we'd hope to wrap all that up by the end of 2028.
Great.
And
Thanks, Brian.
oh,
Right
thank
on
you.
time. Good job. Yeah, pass it to Will.
And good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners, Mayor, Councilors. Straight out, I can show you my presentation. I'm again filling in for Nicole Mardell, who did a tremendous amount of work on it.
Can you talk a little bit closer to the microphone, maybe, Will?
Of course, I'm getting a little bit of a feedback here. We'll see if we can balance that just right.
Stephen can fix it, I'm sure.
Bill, if most of us have our backs to the screen,
Yes.
then you would talk us through it in a way that.
Yeah, that helps you work with the slides. Yes, definitely. Share screen here. I appreciate your patience. There we go. Let's see. There we go. Thank you. So thanks for joining us today. I've been asked to provide a brief update on the county comprehensive plan. I'm going to, in addition to reading you through kind of the notes I've got here for today, I'll talk you through the slides as well. Again, about 10 minutes anticipated for this topic. So of course, comprehensive plan updates. The comprehensive plan update was initiated in April of 2022. The prior plan was already 10 years old, and these plans are to be updated with some regularity. And these comprehensive plan updates are an opportunity to engage more holistically with issues facing the county rather than one-by-one projects. And these can be a valuable tool for high-level policy guidance. It's important to remember that county land use is strongly regulated by the state land use system, and that puts some strong sideboards on what we can and can't do as part of that process. Project's been carried out by Nicole Mardell, myself, Will Groves, Peter Gutowski, our director, as well as our entire planning team. I will also thank both the board and the planning commission for their sincere and continued engagement on that. The slide that you're seeing, that you would see on the screen, talks about how legal requirements, community input lead to planning in various sections, and then head out into zoning, regulation, plan zone changes. Community engagement, we're really proud of our community engagement process. The majority of our 2.5-year timeline was engaged in that. Approximately 18 months, we collected feedback from community members and stakeholders, and this input was used to refine goals and policies. The Planning Commission oversaw the process and produced an initial draft that was released in August 2023. The slide has some statistics about how our engagement went. We had over 29,000 social media impressions, 296 in-person attendees of open houses, an email contact list with 520 people, several thousand unique website visitors. So really focused on this, and appreciate especially MIG, our consultant partner, in helping us amplify our ability to get out to the community. We were proud to announce that we got an award from DLCD for our community engagement efforts. And I want to highlight 2 tools that we used as part of those efforts. The first tool is a thing that we called Meeting in a Box. And this is a staff member going out to the community where they are. And that could be neighborhood associations, community-based organizations, park and rec districts, agency staff. We did 66 of these meetings. So these were pretty time consuming, but really got great high quality engagement where people were. And we had over 400 participants. And as you can see in the picture, one of the more memorable ones, we took place in a horse arena east of town. The other tool that we used, we got a grant for this consider.it online forum. And we were trying to mirror the Meeting in a Box engagement in an online forum. And it allows community members to dive into nuanced policy discussions. People can see the pros and cons of various topics. We got overwhelmingly civil discourse, which is always impressive in an online interaction format. And they were real interested in issues like homelessness, water management, and agricultural land use. As part of that community engagement, we saw a variety of key themes come out. And these really circled around the rezoning of resource lands, wildlife inventories and protections, as well as water conservation, destination resorts, and the protection of private property rights. I think of most interesting kind of to the group today would be our coordination policies. So we wanted to emphasize some new coordination policies that have been added to the comprehensive plan, which has resulted from collaboration with city staff. Thanks for that engagement. And these are reflected in the current draft of the plan. And I want to highlight a couple notable policies. We have encouraging urban reserve planning, coordinating on natural hazard issues, housing development, including the use of county-owned land within city limits, limiting parcelization and of development near cities or infrastructure corridors, as well as supporting the siting and development of city-owned water and wastewater facilities. So you can see there's some significant overlap between issues that we found important to work together on in the past couple of years. So far, the Planning Commission and Board have conducted public hearings to gather input, formal records closed. And the board's going to hold their 6th deliberation meeting on September 16th. And first reading may conduct at that meeting. Finally, looking into next steps, we want to make sure that the comprehensive plan, all the effort, the work that came out of that isn't lost. And so there's a follow-on action plan. So this will be both an identification of topics that came out as kind of one-time actions. So these could be lobbying efforts, code updates, specific interactions. And we'll be looking for our board to prioritize those items and insert those into our annual work plan to make sure that these valuable community engagement efforts weren't lost. And so that's a quick overview of the process we've had. I'm available for any questions that you might have at this time.
Are there any questions in the room about our plan?
No, thank you for that update. And I think it's really good. Oops, I don't know where the feedback's coming from. We have a lot of mics up here. It's really good to hear that the urban reserve, which is what we wanted to make sure that we were talking about with, or just informing everyone of today, is part of that coordination effort for the county, because that really is a city county effort and something that I think we're really seriously thinking about doing in a couple of years. So yeah, great.
One note about the comprehensive plan, I would just suggest anybody go find it, go read it. It's not that long and it's just so informative, a sense of place, the push and pull on the topics, for every introductory paragraph, they're saying there's other folks that didn't agree with it this way. It's just such a great presentation of who we are and where we are here in Deschutes County.
All right.
For coordination purposes with the city, I will mention that we received a tremendous amount of input from constituents who are concerned about declining groundwater levels and water conservation in order to ensure that we're drought resilient in the future. And I don't think we did a very good job at all with incorporating that input or creating policies, goals, or meaningful actions to address water concerns. So to the extent that the city is runs a water utility, and there are aspects of the comprehensive plan that could address declining groundwater levels, may be something that the city is interested in engaging with us on in the future.
Yeah, I think that would probably be a really good topic for another joint meeting. Water use. Okay.
And more what we can do with gray water. Gray water to me is an opportunity that we need to get to the 21st century on. So gray water, and getting rid of junipers. So two of my favorite things.
Yeah. Thank you both for the presentation. Appreciate it. That brings us to number 3.
Oh gosh, we're right on time.
Yes.
Almost. We're early. This is good. It looks like Eric and Nick
Yes.
step up to the plate.
Before you start, Eric, I just wanted to say, I know there's a lot of folks in the room who are really interested in this topic and this discussion today. And some folks have noticed that we don't have a public comment period at this meeting. We haven't typically had those at joint meetings because we want to have either informational updates from staff or actual action-oriented discussions where the two bodies are going to talk about taking some steps together today. We do have additional opportunities if you want to speak at a public meeting related to this topic. The CHRO is meeting next week, 2 weeks. We have city council meetings. There's county commission meetings. We've all received public input already through our emails and phones and those meetings, and that's where that input can continue to come. We just wanted to mention that before we got into the presentation. So.
Thank you. Thanks for that prelude. And I think action is really important and kind of a focus for this presentation that you're going to hear from today. We have a full hour dedicated to this. We'll start with Nick and I just talking about each of our agencies' role in houselessness and what we've been doing over the last couple of years. We have a packet in front of you too to follow along, but we really want to get towards some specific actions, and we've outlined those at the end. I'm actually going to pull up a slide and hopefully workshop what that action looks like and hopefully result in a vote. But before we get there, we think it's important to have some context and background. So I'm just going to share briefly some of the city actions, really grounding ourselves first in the point in time account, which we're all part of. It's a census that's taken every January. So these are the results from the last census. We did see in Central Oregon an increase in our point in time count, but we did see for the first time in many years a decrease in both Bend and Redmond. We about a 5% decrease. So a little less than 1,000 folks in Bend. It's important to point out that that 959 does include those folks that are camping in Juniper Ridge and China Hat, some of those surrounding areas as well. It's not just the city of Bend. What we have been focused on as a body is really a couple of things. I think really starting when the pandemic hit in 2020 to really increase our efforts and leverage some of the federal resources that were available to us through COVID funding, the CARES Act, and the ARPA funds to get things on the ground and apply for some grants. So we went from about 120 or so shelter beds to where we are today, which is 523. Less than half of those are low barrier shelter beds. And so, yeah, that slide, I think that's one more back, is the portfolio of things that we have. One more slide. There you go. The portfolio of facilities that the city is contracting with. Our approach has always been to provide a variety of options. So they range from Stepping Stone, which is an old hotel that was purchased with Oregon Community Foundation funds, and then also funded from some state funds for ongoing operations. Our navigation center, which is our low barrier shelter. Big part of that was, again, ARPA dollars that were kickstarted, then ongoing operations funded by grants and money from the governor's emergency orders. Central Oregon Villages, ARPA funds, that's kind of a tiny home village off of Bear Creek and 27th. The Franklin Avenue Shelter, a lot of this has been in partnership with the county. So thank you for allocation of some of your ARPA resources to make those things happen. And then safe parking sites. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. We're always looking to increase. We have 16 sites currently. Below are the kind of outcomes that we've seen over the past year. So all of those facilities that we have a direct contractual relationship is about 81,000 shelter nights. I do want to mention, though, we have helped, and it was mentioned earlier, Veterans Village, St. Vincent de Paul, there's Bethlehem, and there's many shelters beyond just what the city has direct relationships with. We are just a part of that ecosystem, but we are seeing about 160 folks transition into either permanent or temporary housing, which is 16-17% of that population. So that's good news. I think that's what is contributing to that decrease in point in time count. But we know that safe parking is really that first step of helping folks get out from unsafe situations and camping in rights of way or public property. And so we do need to put more effort towards safe parking. If you go to the next slide. So what we are doing is what we have in place is some safe parking through Central Oregon Villages and through REACH. And they have sites scattered throughout Bend. We are just through a recent effort through the CHRO, we are trying to expand that both with Central Oregon Villages as well as with Mountain View Fellowship. They have a pretty successful safe parking in Redmond. We're trying to expand that here in Bend. So kind of a plug. We're always looking for folks to host additional sites for us. And I think some of the solutions that we'll talk about today are, a version of that, of what is that first step that we can get increased safety and a better path forward for folks, particularly that are in unsanctioned camps. So this just kind of sets the stage. We'll get kind of more into some of these ideas here in a bit.
Great, thank you. Deschutes County, our efforts span the entire county. We are involved in a lot of efforts across all of our communities in our region. We collaborate with all of our partners across all sectors, public, private, and nonprofit sectors, and the entire continuum from safe parking and supports at Juniper Ridge that I will mention briefly, and Eric Kropp, our Deputy County Administrator, will go into it a bit more in depth in a few moments, to affordable housing. So I'm just going to provide a high-level overview. The Board of Commissioners adopted a safe parking program many months ago that allows safe parking within it's within urban growth boundaries and within 1 mile of urban growth boundaries. So this means within the unincorporated areas of the county, and it's allowed on, I'm going to say, non-resource lands. So you hear resource lands a lot, and a lot of people don't know what that means. That's farmer forest lands. So it's not permitted on farmer forest lands, but it is allowed on rural residential lands, multiple use agricultural lands, et cetera, within 1 mile of urban growth boundaries. Again, Eric's going to talk about this in a few minutes, the Juniper Ridge, the basic hygiene stations there, and he'll show you some photos, but basically what we're talking about are porta potties, potable water, hand washing stations, dumpsters, et cetera. So that's at one end of the continuum of providing basic supports. Many folks know that we're engaged with the Department of State Lands, the Oregon Department of State Lands, on a land exchange on the east side of Redmond. In order to make that happen, we need to have the land free of people living on it. And so one of the areas we're working with the city of Redmond on is establishing a 45-acre a camp on 45 acres east of Redmond on 45 acres. It's not that the entire camp will be 45 acres. We're in the very beginning process of that, of working with the city to establish a scope of work, a budget, timeline, et cetera, to establish that. Certainly Oasis Village, also in Redmond. It's south of the 45 acres on the east side of Redmond. Currently, there are 15 tiny homes with bathrooms. Often we also call them cabins at Oasis Village, and we have provided funding for an additional 7 cabins. I'm not sure that our funding's covering the entire amount, but
You're mixing up, it's the Veterans Village is what you were just talking about.
oh, I'm sorry. I was going back and forth between the
Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oasis
Okay. Yeah.
Village is
Sorry.
adding 10.
Sorry. I was looking at the wrong one there. Yeah. My mistake. So 10 more, 15 are there, and there are 10 more that are coming. As Eric King mentioned, working with Mountain View Community Development, the Board of Commissioners has recently approved signing a 65-year lease for 9 acres for 60 units of permanent supportive housing. And providing an additional $200,000 to expand the safe parking program that exists in Redmond. And the county initially helped establish that program with funding. They certainly created the program, and we have been funding it from the beginning. The next slide. So county land and resources for affordable housing. This is an area we could spend the next 10 to 15 minutes on, because the board is engaged in providing land and or resources for affordable housing across the county on a regular basis. So North Point Vista, this is 40 acres on the east side of Redmond. We'll call it a donation. I think it was for all of $1. That process is in place to establish a mixed income neighborhood on the east side of Redmond. We've provided resources to Rooted Homes, donated land for Habitat for Humanity, allocated resources to Cleveland Commons, which is here in Bend, Spencer Court. There are so many other land donations and resources. We could spend 10 minutes just on the ARPA allocations that the county provided to support housing across the county. Another one is recent. This was well reported in the local media. The workforce home, the home ownership for median income earners, providing supports for financial resources for building new homes for median income earners in the county. Very exciting. This was a project that we worked very closely on with the Central Oregon Builders Association, Hayden Homes, Neighbor Impact, Housing Works. Sherry Helt was involved. A lot of folks were involved, and this program is just getting off the ground now. It's very exciting. And of course, one of the greatest successes we have to end on this one is Veterans Village. Yeah, sorry, I went to this one immediately. It's fun to start and end with this one. located on county property in the city of Bend. Great collaboration with the city of Bend, with Bend Heroes, many other partners that help make this happen. Started with 15 tiny homes with bathrooms. 7 more are underway. So a really, really successful effort. So we're involved in a lot and a lot more on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're going to hear now from Matt to take us through what staff is going to recommend for some land management strategy. And then we're also going to hear after that some more about the coordinated approach from Mickey. So Matt, you can start us off.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Matt Stewart, the Real Estate and Facilities Director for the City of Bend. And obviously, as Nick mentioned, Eric Kropp will join me in kind of discussing our action up there in Juniper Ridge. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
Yeah, put the mic right up there. There you go.
There you go.
That's better.
So first thing I usually like to do is just kind of provide some geographical context for what is Juniper Ridge, because that often can be multiple things to multiple people depending where you are. So Juniper Ridge tends to be an area of land up in the northeast area of the city of Bend, as well as kind of the south area there for the county. As you can see from this map, this is between the red, blue, and green area. That is both county and city land. That represents about just over 2,000 acres, which is quite a significant area when we talk about land management and strategy as we approach that. Zooming in on it, you can see there's kind of 2 parts to the city. Portion of land that's blue, that is within city limits. That's what we're actually developing. So sometimes you'll hear us refer to Juniper Ridge, and that's where our new public works campus is going. That's where Pacific Power is building their new regional headquarters. And we also have a series of other private industrial developments going on right now. And we've also will be discussing selling additional land up there as we progress over the next couple of years. The area in red is the 1,000 acres that's outside of city limits. That tends to be the area when we refer to where are people living, camping, and staying out there outside of city limits. And then, of course, the green is the area of the county that is adjacent to us and includes both the west side and the east side of 97. The east side of 97, which is where affectionately area of Dirt World tends to be, along with some city property there adjoining the railroad track. Sorry, trying to speak through the context to help.
Yeah, just so everyone's clear, as we're talking about things that we could do on county property, we are talking about the east side of Highway 97.
Correct. And as I walk through today, you'll hear me say both west side and east side of the railroad tracks, and I'm referring to city property that's bisected by the railroad. So everything is east of 97 from the city, but I'll talk west side of railroad and east side of railroad when I'm talking later today for context. So I thought we'd start kind of with handing over some of the cleanup efforts, and I'll let Eric kind of introduce what the county has done recently up here in this area. So, why are both buttons doing the same? Oh, there you go. Sorry. Additional map. The area in purple is what we're going to talk about in relation to the cleanup efforts there. So again, that's in between 97 and the railroad tracks.
Thank you, Matt. To begin with, I want to point out that what the county's done at Juniper Ridge is not a long-term solution. If you drive up Highway 97 and you look to the east, you still see lots of camp and camping and debris. So it's not a long-term solution, but it's a start. At Juniper Ridge, we have an interdepartmental team that meets once a week. Also, we often meet with city staff as well to coordinate. And we're really been the boots on the ground at Juniper Ridge with the hygiene stations. So in the picture is just the basic, a basic station. We have 3 stations. You can see the porta potties, the hand washing station, the potable water, and then the dumpster. Next slide. Looking closer at the drinking water, on the left is what we started out with. We had to work with the contractor to add insulation to the tap for the winter months. And then as you can see on the left, there's a big ditch where the water comes out. And it's very difficult. It's been very difficult for people to fill up their containers. So based on some feedback, we recently worked with the contractor to put the drinking water tanks on cement blocks. And then we added a hose that makes it easier for people to fill up their containers. Next slide. The remediation efforts includes cleaning up abandoned camps and also tires. There are abandoned tires, and there are also tires in people's camps. We've cleaned up the abandoned tires, and then many of the people living there have coordinated with our contractor to collect tires and hand them over. And the picture on the left is one of those camps that had a lot of tires. They worked with the contractor, and those are now being properly disposed of. Our contractor has also provided snow removal, which allows access to the hygiene stations during the winter months and also helps with access in case of an emergency. This is just a snapshot of the services by the numbers. We started this effort in last summer, and the services kind of rolled out at different times based on when we signed contracts with the contractors. But since last summer, our 30-yard dumpster has been emptied 13 times. A 30-yard dumpster holds between 7,000 and 10,000 pounds of trash. So that's up to 130 pounds that have been removed through the dumpsters. In addition, 131,000 pounds of trash have been removed from the abandoned camps and other camps. Our contractor has removed 118 bio buckets, which are used for human waste. There's been almost 900 tires disposed of, snow removal, which I mentioned, and they have cleaned up 39 abandoned camps. When we first rolled it out, there was lots of attention on the fact that we hired a security contractor and that the security contractor was armed. I'm very pleased to report that there has been no use of force incidents, and the security contractor, because they are armed, the personnel have to go through the same training as police officers and deputy sheriffs. The security contractor patrols the area, they check on the hygiene stations, and they've also been an important resource for residents. I won't read all the bullet points on the slide above, or the slide that you're seeing, but I'll just highlight three main key points. The security contractor, they know every person by first name. This is just on the county-owned Juniper Ridge. They've also called in 3 fire starts so that could be addressed. They educate the residents about fire safety and no burn rules. And they've also provided medical assistance. One was a minor medical situation, and another situation, they helped escort medics to a patient at Juniper Ridge. In terms of costs, the column on the left is our total expenditures since last summer. It totals about $230,000. And then the column on the right is a monthly breakdown, and we're averaging about $17,000 per month at Juniper Ridge. In the spring, I updated the commissioners, and at that point, the number was $14,000 a month. That monthly cost has increased because of the summer months. We've had to provide more water during the hot times, and then also security patrol was going out there once a day. And after talking to the commissioners, there was a request for security to go out 2 times a day, and so that's why the monthly average amount is a little bit higher.
Thanks. And just to add on to that, the city has also engaged in cleanup efforts on that west side of the railroad tracks, just north of the county's property. Same thing. We've engaged both cleaning up existing camps, bio bucket, and other. We don't have any facilities necessarily set up. We just have our contractors go out and work with the residents that are out there cleaning up their campsites, providing trash bags, and connecting with them multiple times a week. So from our standpoint, about 104,000 pounds of trash have been removed. We've cleaned up about 29 abandoned camps. And so far, our costs to date have been about $100,000 for the cleanup. And we do have an IGA with the county, and we've just kind of finalized those numbers for the fiscal 24 year. And we'll reimburse about $22,000 to share in some of those hygiene station costs.
Can I ask a question?
Please. Sure.
So you may have already said this, Eric, but in the winter time, what's the plan in terms of just the potential for that water tank to freeze? Is there something that you might have already answered the question?
Yeah, the potable water did not freeze, or if it did, it was just at the very top.
Okay.
Because it's such a large amount of water. We did have hand washing stations that froze, so we worked with the contractor to add salt, also to have hand sanitizer. So we were able to work around those issues.
And then how many people do we think are being served by the?
We're gonna get to that.
You're talking to them about that next, okay?
Your head tonight, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I kind of wanted to touch on some recent incidents that have come up here on the city property. I do want to highlight these have been isolated. And as someone who's been out Juniper Ridge over the past 2 years, I do want to highlight some of the improvements, especially what county staff has done with their property and as well as the cleanup efforts. We've definitely seen incidents decrease, at least from my perspective, over the last year. But we still have serious recent incidents that raised some concern and something that we'd like to address. And we'll kind of outline that strategy here in a little bit, but just to kind of highlight for the group. Couple of them is we had an incident where a vehicle drove into the adjacent to the hydro station that exists on the Juniper Ridge property in between the county and city property that required CID to distribute a crane and to remove that vehicle, and that could have had a threat to the CID system. We've also had vehicles run through gates. This gate is at the very north end of that property that leads up and towards the interchange to the very north, and that is now being sort of repaired as we speak with the property owner. Specifically on the east side of the railroad tracks where the city property is, we have a series of ditch canals that CID operates, and there we typically see campers sort of reside along those canals, often creating dams, bridges, or other elements that kind of block the water for their own use. That creates service issues for CID as well as impacts to their customers northeast end of the city-owned property itself. We've also experienced some items around on Deschutes, off of Deschutes Market Road where residents have reported gunshots repeatedly. We did uncover that someone had been unlocking and cutting the gate. When we remediated that, an individual actually built their own gate, cutting all the fence. So that is the picture on the right. And as part of that, we do see residents that, oh, sorry, slow. Start kind of establishing their own sort of safety measures. So constructing their own entrances, creating their own sort of cattle guard slash emergency access or notification devices there on the left in the roadway that can cause hazard to emergency response vehicles that are out there, perhaps patrolling or investigating fires. We also have incidents as we've closed down the gates there at the railroad separating. We've shut those gates to try to keep traffic from going over. So you may recall 4 years ago, we had an incident where a van was high center on the track, causing a train to hit it and creating additional damage. So we've locked those gates, but we do see still wildcatting across that. And that leads to additional risk for cars being stranded on the rail tracks. And again, impacting our partners on the property. And then lastly, we are all aware of the mile 132 market file. And then on the right, you can see we've had incidents where people are actually cutting gates. So this is where the railroad gate was actually cut so that they could gain access and get other vehicles into the bags.
Matt, is the cost so the roughly $100,000 city cost, $230,000 county cost, does that include remediating the damage for these incidents? That's just monthly burn.
That's just our cleanup efforts on the west side of the tracks.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're getting into the numbers next. Okay.
So here we kind of like to review the camps and the population data that we have up there and then get into kind of a strategy we like to approach going forward.
For the county-owned land, there are still 21 occupied camps with 37 people living in those. Our security contractor reports that the people camping there constantly fluctuates. They noted that last month there were 6 new residents. 3 moved from the city-owned side, and then 3 were new to the Juniper Ridge area. But the people out there and the numbers fluctuate constantly.
And agree. On the west side of the railroad tracks for us, we have about 50, 60 camps. Again, that does fluctuate as they kind of move in between. That area is approximately 120 acres. On the east side of the tracks, that is where we're talking about a 500-acre area. We have just under 20 camps, and that tends to fluctuate depending on summer and winter. Obviously, when the CID canals are running with water, we see a few more camps there. When winter hits and those canals are dried, we tend to see campers move away. Also, because of snow, it's difficult to get in. So we tend to see a fluctuation on that east side.
Matt, on those camps, do you have any kind of an approximation of numbers?
Because we don't patrol quite to the level that security does on the county side, I would estimate we're somewhere between 150 to 200 total people between both
For
sides.
both of them?
On all the city-owned land.
On all,
150 to 200.
on all city land.
Thank you.
On the east side, we do have significant amount of debris and trash, so quite a few acres, as well as a lot of vehicles out there have been left. So there is a significant cleanup effort that will have to occur on the city side as we approach kind of our strategy going forward. So our process of the city is we're recommending to closing the east side of the railroad tracks. So that's about 500 acres. And as part of that closure, we would like to identify the west side. That's currently where most of the campers are residing as a safe stay rest area. So that's somewhere where people can, in their current situation with a vehicle, be able to camp and stay and provide those services as was existing with the hygiene stations. We'd like to increase the number of hygiene stations, so potentially add a hygiene station or two onto the city property, just further north of where the existing ones are. And then we'd actually, because of the success we've seen with the security team that's been out on the county property, our recommendation is to extend the security onto the city property and allow them to sort of operate in the same manner. We see that as a successful operation and also provides additional data points for us to kind of monitor and take into account.
And when
Then-
would that start if we do approve it?
I have a little schedule, but I'd like to probably do it here as we approach the next year if we can.
Are you talking about like next year, May, or are you talking about like the first of the year?
We haven't totally worked through the strategy, but I think the sooner it would be.
Because it really does seem to help.
Yes.
Not enough, but it does help.
And then lastly, it's working on how does the city sort of enforce and manage the closed area on the east side of the railroad tracks and ensure that individuals don't end up going back, or that we are able to keep that area clean so we can look at that for the future. So again, just graphically, the area that's sort of hatched that I showed earlier on the in between 97 and the railroad tracks, so representing the county property and the city property, that's about 170 acres. That would be the area we identify as the temporary safe stay area. We'd close all the rest of that area in red. We're already monitoring the area in blue under our existing camping code, and then the county property would probably look to do maybe the same with the area to the west of 97, although county staff reports there's not very many individuals camping on the area. So that may not be quite necessary to go to the full closed approach.
You just emphasize again why the east side closure versus the west side?
Sure. From a land management strategy, covering 600 to 1,000 acres is very difficult. That property, from a fire mitigation standpoint, is the cost to fully mitigate to that level would possess or pose significant challenges for us as staff and monetarily. I think from that is the area that's most vulnerable when we talk about adjacency to residential. We do have, obviously with the most recent fire, we obviously have some fire break roads that exist in and around the boundary between city and county. However, the boundary that to the north is that east side of the city track. So if we're able to kind of locate that, we have much better access to everyone. We have all those roads kind of mapped. We do patrol it regularly. That is somewhere that's already been cleaned up, mitigated, and an area that we can respond to quickly. Whereas the east side, if there's an incident, response times tend to take a little bit longer. It's also hard to locate because of the vast size. But we have made steps, and I talked about that after the mile 32 marker of us getting items into our emergency response system so they're able to get to things faster. It still poses significant risk, especially to neighboring residences. I'm sorry.
Did you talk about this property storage on that map?
Did not. Thank you for reminding me. And then we are identifying what is known as the Rock Crusher 2 site. There within the city limits, kind of on the lower end of the map there. That is about a 2-acre parcel. We'd like to then fence that and have that as a property storage area. So those that we asked to leave and they need storage, we can locate their personal property on that as well as part of our cleanup efforts, removing vehicles and other items. We have a place to store that. They're on the Rock Crusher 2 site. From a scheduling standpoint, our end date would be, we would like to have everyone off of the east side of the property by the end of May 2025. So we're working backwards from that date. Obviously, we would do at least a 72-hour notice. We would more than likely do a 30 and a 60-day notice of that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to see a fluctuation of camps based on winter. So we're kind of timing this up so that we can sort of respond in the spring prior to the opening of those canals to sort of prevent people from going back and establishing new camps, and then work to remove those who stayed through the winter. And then in between them, we'd be monitoring, setting up the storage space, as well as working to establish the new hygiene stations, the security into effect, and kind of expanding on the west side, the services there.
Any questions on the timeline?
May 2025 coincides with the beginning of fire season next year.
Correct.
Yes. And generally, we think the canals turn on around then, depends on the season.
April, May.
Yeah. Okay.
Could I ask,
Sure.
is this entire area within a mile of the UGB? I was
So-
thinking about the county's policy.
Where we're proposing that people to stay on the.
Yeah.
That's, it's
That has a scale on it.
It's
It
probably.
does, and it
it's
looks like
real
part of it
close. I
is
think it's
just
actually just
outside.
outside, yes.
Right,
I believe the
most of the
county's
area
property is probably in, and I think our property is technically out.
Mhm.
If I'm visualizing a mile buffer.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
So again, just kind of summarize our strategy. We'd like to establish a joint city-county temporary safe stay area on the west side of the railroad tracks. So that would be about 170 acres. We continue to provide the services that are existing today and expand on those services onto the city property with the security and the additional hygiene stations for at least another 12 months. Hopefully, we and possibly look to extend that longer depending on its success. Extend the security presence to the city property on that west side of the tracks. And then with county, we'd like to partner and develop and release potentially an RFQ or some form of augmentation to our existing service providers to provide housing related case management. And that can include establishing metrics through individual service plans to evaluate their tangible progress, as well as assisting and supporting households move through transitioning from temporary to permanent housing that exists out there. And that's really sort of a next progress step as we sort of look at this area and try to move people off of it, knowing the number of beds that we have within all of our jurisdictions today.
Okay. So before we get into sort of the other regional and the China Hat efforts, any specific questions about this, we are going to come back and discuss more, but I did want Mickey to be able to present sort of what's going on in the other areas as well, because we know that if folks are moved from one area, they might go somewhere else. So we need to be addressing it regionally.
And the area that will be closed, how many camps do we think are in there?
There's less than 20.
Less, thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to go to the next section. Oh, sure, go ahead, Councilor Robin.
So the area that you're proposing to allow to stay open to camping is 120 acres?
170?
170 if we count county and city.
And why, what's the reason behind that number?
Acre size.
Yeah.
It's just a natural divide of where we're seeing people establishing campsites today. So it's a place we're already monitoring out there, checking on people and already doing our cleanup services.
And would there be a limitation to new people arriving at that area?
Not necessarily. There's definitely spots that are open. That area has, as we've discussed, we've obviously cleaned up abandoned camps. Some people have moved in. So there's still a lot of opportunity should we relocate people from the east side to that. And if people want to relocate from somewhere else, that is a potential. I don't think we're recommending capping it necessarily. If we think it gets to that point, I think that's another strategy discussion of overcrowding and what kind of risk may come with that.
So currently, if we move everybody to the 170 acres, how many people will be on that 170 acres roughly?
I think we'll be around 200 total.
So that's like almost one person per acre,
Yes,
which seems like quite a bit if we're trying to mitigate fire damage.
right. If we're trying to, it seems 170 seems pretty
Yes, but
big.
doing that math, yes, I'd say from topography, there's a lot of pockets where you cannot stay. So we actually tend to see people congregate together in pockets. So I wouldn't necessarily, not everyone's spread out. They tend to be located kind of around pockets. So there's areas that within there that there aren't anybody, and there's areas where it is full of individuals. Right.
And we don't know that everyone who is told, hey, you can't be on the east side anymore, not necessarily everyone will go to this place, but we
Correct.
want to offer it as the place that they can go.
Yeah, and I would say 3/4 of those on the east, they're already actually congregating in and around where the railroad crossings are. So they're already adjacent to where the camps are on the west side. So we're really only talking about 5 or 6 camps that are actually deep into the east area that we would need to significantly sort of relocate. The rest of them are already kind of taking advantage of services that exist on the west side.
Great, thank you.
And
Okay,
just kind of
question? Yeah.
Following that thought, each sanitation station costs money. Providing places for people to provide services, wraparound services.
Yeah.
That's an expenditure. I mean, is there any thought going into spatially consolidating things to make it as efficient as possible to provide those resources?
We can. We've in the past when we've attempted, and I'm talking series of past pre-COVID things like that, we've attempted to sort of relocate folks, especially as we were looking to develop the North Interceptor sewer line. We struggle with trying to keep people in certain areas. They tend, if there's incidents or they don't get along with other campers, they tend to start kind of spreading out and then kind of congregating with folks that they would like to be around. And so we can look to We can look to shrink that. I do want to be,
Uh-oh.
This phone, someone's phone on the table is buzzing somewhere.
Must be mine.
It's you.
It's me.
There we go.
Oh, there you go.
It's turned off.
Okay.
I think we also, we can look to establish additional gates and restrict movement to the north. That is an option. We do have other partner agencies, so the feds, BLM, others own land to the north, as well as we have to allow access for CYD and others. So there's still a possibility that there could be folks wanting to move onto the federal land, and in which case we would challenge between our two agencies on preventing that from happening. I am not opposed to shrinking that area. We sort of select this area because this is where we've tended to see people congregate today. And in retrospect, it seems like a large area, but right now it's not as bad as it sounds in terms of managing that 170 acres.
I think it would depend on what the service providers say that they can also.
That too.
What Commissioner Chang was talking about, if they come back from the RFQ and say, there's no
Yeah.
way we could possibly do 170 acres, then maybe it's something.
And I'd be interested to hear what they say as they're going out there now delivering medication or other services. So they're quite familiar with where those campers are and those who are residing out there already. And with the road network, we would definitely have to kind of curtail movement that way as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
All right, let's have the next couple slides from Nikki.
We just mentioned one other thing as far as threat mitigation that the city manager mentioned at our meeting a couple weeks ago, is that our enforcement, they have a live map of where folks are. And in addition to the county, literally knowing the names of every, so it's not quite as, dangerous, frankly, to try and locate people if there's an emergency.
That's true. I think that the challenge is it's really our vehicles get stuck. So we know where people are, but
right.
getting back there
Uh-huh.
and when there's winter conditions,
Uh-huh.
it is not a safe situation to
Uh-huh.
cross a canal and a railroad.
Of course.
So yeah, we do have a sense of where they are, but it's still not as safe as it could be.
So maybe what I'm saying is in terms of 150 acres being a lot of acres, well, it's less than what we're trying to do now. And we do, kind of manage what we do now. I have faith that with 150, police and fire will be able to find people within there. Isn't that, a correct thing to say? I understand about service providers is a different thing to be able to contact people. But I just wanted to make that point that
Even fire, these, smaller the area, you need to be responding within.
The better. Yeah.
of
Yep.
course,
So I mean,
Yep.
so
absolutely.
that's another reason to think about.
Yeah.
Spatially consolidating to the extent that it's
Feasible.
feasible and functional.
Yes, thank you.
And
Thank you.
Redmond City says that they allow 25 per acre where they've got it within their city limits. So, you could do 200 people in 8 acres.
Yeah.
And you think about the cost when we added another Compass driving around, that added another $3,000 a month. So definitely, and it's got to be safety on both sides.
Absolutely.
Our community has to feel safe again.
Exactly. No, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, Pat.
Yeah, I mean, 170 acres, I'm like, oh.
Well, and the whole area, even
Yes.
with the whole area, the county and the city really have done a good job figuring out where people are, where the roads are, how to get in there when there's an emergency. I just wanted to give credit, on that.
Thank you.
Harry, what does our shelter code say about outdoor shelters and do you recall in terms of how many per, I'm trying to remember. Can't remember.
It's not going to apply to this area.
No, just
So
just from a basic
Well, just
idea of.
The concept that I'm thinking about here, and I think the lawyers are definitely supportive of the whole idea of this lightly managed camp. The thing that you will all have to think about is there's probably not one solution that you're going to decide on and then stick with. We've talked to our clients. I don't know if your lawyers have talked to you about this idea of a state-created danger, which has started with the police departments, but now has come into the homeless more in California. But it's a theory where if the state government creates a particularized danger and then knows about it and it's obvious and then doesn't act. There are court cases now. So it's happened when you've congregated homeless people too close. There's a case near railroads where they sued the government. There's a case where there may be drug problems or attacks by homeless against homeless. So I think if you're going to, I get the idea of congregating closely for the providers, but if, as Matt said, if people feel unsafe, then you have to be able to adjust and say, we need space to move. So it's just if we congregate tightly and then, or loosely, and then people don't feel safe, we've created that state created danger. So it's just, it's a theory out there and it's not something to say, don't act. It's just something to say, you have to watch what happens. And then if you know about the issue, you do something else.
Right. And I think it was helpful to hear from Eric Krupp the way that the security has been working out there and that it's been expanded once and potentially could be expanded again.
Exactly.
To continue that type of supervision that would
Yeah,
we
you don't
would
get
need to do.
stuck in an idea. You say, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to have enough land, and then we're going to see what we hear and what is actually happening. And then we may have to change our approach.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
seems that kind of flexibility built into this approach in the beginning is really important for all these reasons, on the legal side, on the safety side.
Yep.
For residents. And I think it's really important that we hear from the service providers about their sense of what's going to work. I mean, it might make sense to talk about some smaller acres, but not constraining ourselves so much that we
Exactly.
create
Our
more
need
problems and can't adapt.
Flexibility and the
Right.
way they react to whatever is happening out there.
Yeah.
Can we
Great.
get guidance in the RFP process? I
I-
mean, we can, right? That we
Yeah,
want
and I
it to be
think-
as constrained, we want it to be as safe
Right.
and narrow as possible to remove as much fire danger as possible.
Right. And I think any RFP, if we direct staff to do that, they would be coming back with that at some point saying, hey, we're going to put this out and here's what it's going to say. So, all right, Mickey, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, City Council. For the record, my name is Mickey Dirting, Strategic Initiatives Manager from the City of Bend, but today I'm wearing my assisting our regional team hat. I'm here to provide you all with an update on the All Hands on Deck China Hat Pilot Roundtable. On June 20th, the Deschutes County and cities of Bend, Lapine, Redmond, and Sisters Coordinated Houseless Response Office, also known as CHRO, convened an all hands on deck roundtable with local, state, and federal agencies, along with service providers and community members, including neighbors who live close to the encampments in China Hat, and a person who lived in China Hat for 3 years, someone who has lived experience. All were there to learn about and address unsheltered homelessness in the region. With this collaborative effort, we launched a multi-agency initiative to address unsheltered homelessness on federal land and selected the China Hat encampment in the Deschutes National Forest as the first site. The hope is to model this China Hat this China Hat pilot and multi-agency approach for the other areas of Central Oregon where large concentrations of unsheltered populations living in public land or forest land. So this multi-agency partnership is really aimed at strengthening and accelerating our local efforts, boots on the ground efforts, the service provider efforts to move unsheltered people living in spaces not intended for human habitations into shelters that will ensure a safe and dignified location for individuals or families to reside with opportunities to connect with to resources and to move into more permanent housing. So at that roundtable, we were there to get us all on the same page. We started with hearing from various perspectives about the problems, but most of the time was allocated to conversations about solutions. So I'm going to give you some 3 examples of outcomes from the meeting and solution ideas. The first one was United States Veteran Affairs offered Veteran Affairs outreach and shelters for veterans to free up resources for non-veterans who are unsheltered. USDA advisor Dr. Banga Ajilore offered ideas for expanded outreach, case management, behavioral health. He also recommended that we get the Department of Human and Health Services to the table. But if we are still facing barriers, he recommended that we possibly advocate to Congress for a possible statute. And the third example of an outcome from that meeting, a solution idea, is peer navigation, and everybody was unanimous with exploring that and looking for funding to resource that type of program. Since that roundtable, we've met with federal and local government partners to follow up on the resources offered to see what's available, what's accessible, and what's usable for this particular initiative. The Department of Human and Health Services is also now at the table per Dr. Ajilori's recommendation. We've met with local service providers, and our hope is for them to lead and co-design this initiative and for all of us to be here to support them, strengthen and accelerate their efforts. We have also been receiving guidance regarding best practices and what's been working very well nationwide. From Katie Miller, she's with the United States Intergovernmental Council on Homelessness. She's a regional senior advisor, and I'll refer to United States Intergovernmental Council on Homelessness as USICH from here on forward. So it's been very helpful to help her, to have her be part of our team as well. And you've all met her at the roundtable, and then at the city council meeting, she was there with Gina Rendina. Gina has also been attending our meetings, our offline conversations, because she's working on a nationwide policy for addressing homelessness on federal lands. So it's been really great to have her at the table as well. And of course, we've met with Deschutes National Forest. Holly Jukes, she's the supervisor to brainstorm on all these framework that we've been sharing with her, because China Hat is in Deschutes National Forest. It's USDA jurisdiction, and they have the authority to decide what type of actions they're actually going to take and direction they'll take all this information we're providing them. She can then look what's within their laws, what's within their core services. Again, it's federal jurisdiction, not the county, cities, or CHRO, but we're here to assist. So why are we doing this? The big why? And I keep getting asked this. For both the house and unhoused, there has been health and safety concerns and issues, as well as environmental impact. And per the roundtable, there is an estimated 200 to 400 human beings in living situations, living spaces not intended for human habitation. To protect our community, both the house and unhoused, and to prevent further damage to the environment, there are a couple of strategies that we're proposing. So the first one is called the Stand Down of Resources, and that's actually a program named by the United States Veterans Affairs. So we're copying a label for it right now. Don't get attached, we might be changing that name. But what that is, if you go to the website, it says stand downs are typically 1 to 3 days events, providing supplies and services to homeless veterans, such as food, shelter, clothing, health screenings, and VA Social Security benefits, counseling. Veterans can also receive referrals to other assistance, such as healthcare, housing solutions, employment, substance use treatment, and mental health counseling. They are collaborative events coordinated between local VA medical centers, the Department of Labor, other government agencies, and community-based homeless service providers. For our local stand down of resources, what we're looking under that umbrella is to have an assessment survey. This is where service providers will do an assessment of needs by the unsheltered and unhoused in China Hat. Doing that assessment now will really help us plan for resources, identify the gaps, and ensure we are providing solutions that match their needs. We're also going to be looking at identifying stand down locations, pool of housing, including temporary, regulated, authorized outdoor living options, such as the one that Matt just shared with you, basic service provisions, such as the one that Eric Kropp just shared, and hub of services like the VA's stand down, and then environmental restoration and enforcement strategy. We were also asked by the Deschutes National Forest to look at the Incident Command Systems model. That's a ICS for short. And what that is years and years and years of lessons learned turned into best practices by all the disasters and emergencies we've experienced nationwide. It's an example of an all hands on deck, multi-agency approach, working together, multi-agency coming together to fulfill a common goal. It's very structured with clear roles and responsibilities. It's also something that Katie Miller from the United States USICH has shared with us that's worked very well for many other regional teams nationwide to help them with their efforts as well to address houselessness. The other strategy, the second strategy, is fuel reduction. We propose that these are very two different worlds, the stand down of resources and the fuel reduction. Stand down of resources is addressing unsheltered houselessness. You have subject matter expertise from homeless service providers, whereas fuel reduction is really about wildfire and fire and disaster emergencies are under the emergency management purview. And the subject matter expert for that is firefighters or emergency management. And they're responsible for wildfire, fire mitigation, including fuel reduction, preparedness, response, recovery. And they also have access to USDA funding for wildfire crisis strategies to reduce wildfire risk. And they also have a department, Oregon Department of Forestry, that has access to fire protection program. And this is in the wheelhouse of the Deschutes National Forest. So what they really want help with is with addressing houselessness, because that's not their wheelhouse. With the all hands on deck, we have as well offered to assist with fuel reduction nonetheless. And then again, just to remind you that these are all concepts, and it is for Deschutes National Forest to determine what is within their jurisdiction, law, core services, what actions they wish to take or what they can take to move forward. And we are here to assist and support and to follow through on our commitment at the roundtable to be a partner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mickey.
Right. I want to just end with a slide around resources and then really transition into a potential outline of action items. So
I was just wondering, we didn't have Christy Bollinger come up. Did Christy have anything she wanted to add today?
Eric was.
I know, but Christy's been part of our team for quite a few years now, and I know she's here with limited capacity.
Thank you, Commissioner Adair. I don't really think I have anything to add. Eric and Matt and Mickey, I think all did a wonderful job recapping of where we are, where we've been, where we are, and where we really need to go.
And we've been coordinating with Christy on the slides, and we appreciate her support, even though she's been recovering.
Well, your name was on the agenda and Nicole wasn't here either, so I knew you were here, so thank you. And fast recovery. Only 5 weeks to go.
I'll just offer, we would have incorporated Christy a lot more into the entire presentation that Eric and I have been sharing, but she has been out. Thank you.
all right, so we've kind of zoomed into Juniper Ridge. Now we're zooming back out a little bit and talk about resources that we have available to us to put application to some of these ideas. So if you go to the next slide, I know there's a lot to read here, so I'm just going to summarize. And there's some things that actually are not included on this list that I want to cover as well. So of course, I want to recognize the county for their contribution, the $2 million that has been set aside, some of which has already been allocated to Mountain View Safe Parking. There's the CHRO funding. That's just the unrestricted funds. So some of that has been used for staffing, but a majority of it is unrestricted. Some of it is encumbered for specific projects that are listed on this sheet. And then, of course, the governor's office has stepped in and said, we are willing to share our contract with you for shelter pods and the about $1.1 million worth. And then on the city of Bend, what's not on here is we have about $500,000 of unallocated ARPA funds too, that I think that are available for us to kind of think about how we could apply resources to some solutions that we can sort of start to frame out today. And then I just want to recognize the work that the CHRO has done recently. So they have created a procurement process for providers to really tackle the unsanctioned camping issue in our county. And so we received, I think it was 14 proposals, and they were scored into these 3 different tiers. And so the board recommended really moving forward with tier 1, having conversations with those folks that are in that tier 2, and then tier 3 kind of needing to work more with the providers and refining those proposals. So we have a process already, and we also have existing providers that are doing work, as I mentioned before, with safe parking and other services. So what we'd like to do is, take our network, take this process and put some application and some of the concepts that we talked about today. So what I would like to do is share my screen and actually have kind of a worksheet. And I'm going to pass out a handout that summarizes what we see as some potential action that would lead towards a vote. I heard this at the county meeting yesterday. and prepping for this, of really coming out of here with some clear action. And we've kind of put it into two buckets. And so as I share my screen so the public can follow along, you'll see the handout. The first is really specific to Juniper Ridge. And then the second is more of that regional coordination that we just talked about and heard from Mickey. So let me put this up.
Actually, Eric, we only had 7 proposals in the RFQ process. I think you said 14.
Oh, I might have referred to we did a process and that might have been different ones. So thank
Okay.
you for clarifying.
We had, the churro had 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's what's listed I'm looking at.
You're right. Sorry about that. Okay.
So, and for all those here, Eric's going to go through this, and then I think we want to enter into discussion if this reflects what we want to do together. I think the idea would get to a formal vote, a motion and vote at the end, but we wanted to provide the opportunity to discuss obviously all the points and see where we wanted to go.
So this is what it currently looks like, and I'll just kind of walk through it. And it does on the Juniper Ridge strategy, it would be the establishment of a temporary safe stay area with the direction of staff to coordinate the legal issues that we've kind of identified here. There's some potential strategies that we've kind of brainstormed. We'd love to work with county legal on that. Communication and outreach coordination, and then scoping of the on-site services. So we have something that's there that exists. How do we enhance it? Leverage existing contracts and procurement efforts that I just mentioned. I maybe would adding a safety element. I wanted to reflect some conversation that you all had earlier to making sure that safety is the most important. And then the second bullet point there, main bullet point, is the closure of that east side by May 31st, 2025. That's consistent with what Matt had presented on a timeline. And then I wanted to add here this continuation of fire fuel reduction. So we recently applied for a grant. County contributed 30,000. We contributed 50,000. We're trying to leverage that to get more resources to do fuel reduction in that area. That's going to continue. We want to make sure that that is formalized with action today. And then on kind of more of that regional approach is we really encourage both bodies here to help promote the work of the CHRO and allocating those regional resources, some of which I kind of outlined, to assist in the case management, the operations. You know, we have some resources. We're going to go farther if we can kind of pool them together and really allocate them in a logical way across the county. And then I put this last bullet point. We didn't talk about it here, but I know there's been a lot of discussion around the Gales property and interest. And as we've talked about with Juniper Ridge and the safe stay area, I think the vision is that that'll help provide, you know, a transition, but we really see maybe more of a permanent solution being at that Gales property. And so really advocating for some of that the zone change and the other things that are, I think, before the CHRO to make that kind of that next step. So kind of pointing in that direction.
Great.
This is just a starting point. So again, I have the ability to change this and reflect discussion and work with Nick on that.
I think this looks great. Let's start at the top, right, around the temporary safe stay area. I think we said, you know, when we're talking about on-site services, we want safety. I would like the words housing case management or something similar. The idea of connecting people to pathways out of that situation. I think it's important to call that out. Any other comments on that?
And if we're
first
going to do
bullet?
something with case management, according to the studies that have been done in Lane County, it needs to be done 4 days out of 7 days a week, and you can actually make progress. You can't just go out there once a week. You've actually got to be there 4 out of 7 days. And so I feel like we've been doing a lot of things. We've spent millions of dollars in this county, but I want to see some results. And after hearing the pilot project in Lane and elsewhere in the country, it can't be just once a week. It's got to be consistent.
Look, you can look at the screen here. I'm trying to reflect your conversation. Intensive. I can actually put days if you want me to. Case management. I put housing as well. Connection.
Commissioner Dare, I totally agree with you. And one of the things that I really liked on one of the earlier slides that Matt had was talked about metrics. And we talk a lot about this at the CHRO as well. And having an idea of where people are coming from as they're staying there, and also where they're going. So we know how our government dollars are being used and if they're being used well. And we know also if we are providing the types of services and shelter options that our homeless need as well. So I think that would be important for me to have in this temporary safe stay area.
I added
And-
that.
Yeah.
I added
And
that.
the other important thing that Rick Russell does is his team follows up for 6 months
Yeah.
when people have been placed. We've got to know that they don't just fall out of
Yes.
their pathway to rejoining society. So, that 6-month follow-up, I believe, is one of the critical elements that Rick's been incredibly successful with.
Yeah, and these are also sounding to me like part of the RFP or the RFQ for saying, hey, we're looking for folks to provide these types of services. How might people be able to do that? So I think we're reflecting that. Any other comments on the first part? Any comments on the closure date?
So I have two comments on that on the closure part.
Okay.
One, I mean, closure of East Side, I would prefer, or I would suggest we characterize this as a full closure, except for what area is necessary for this, whatever we're calling this area.
Temporary managed camp.
Or temporary safe
Whatever
stay
you
area?
wanna call it, I mean, I think the semantics are important, that we're talking about a full closure of everything except for the area that is going to be, if this passes, that's going to be open, because I don't think the status quo is safe. And I think we need to send a clear message of, I see on the map, the whole west side of the highway is closed to the public. I think we should characterize everything that's not open as closed.
You see the language I put up there? I said full closure of areas owned by the city and county outside of the temporary safe stay area.
That I think does reflect it. And then if the temporary safe stay area changes for some reason, we've connected it to that instead of the tracks. I totally understand why we were looking at East Side just from everything Matt said, but I think that's a good point to just link it to the solution that we're creating. So that makes sense to me.
And then my only other question is date. I mean, I understand this is gonna be a ton of work.
Mhm.
But if our fire seasons are longer and longer, and if there's a way to do it sooner, and it's possible, I would advocate for sooner.
I mean, because of the irrigation canal situation, I don't know, May 1st would be really a little bit more ideal. I know Matt's saying the end of May,
Matt
but
and Eric, I think that's,
I mean, what does staff feel? Does May 1st, does that pose an issue?
Matt, just keep smiling.
well, we don't, I think it's very important that we pick a date that does not change.
Yes.
So that if we say this is the date, it is the date. So for that reason, I might err a little bit more on keeping it on the 31st to make sure we don't get to May 1st and go, shoot, we could not get our staff and our resources quite ready. We have to push it out. I think that is a bad message. So that might lean more towards keeping it on the 31st. Matt, what do you think?
I'm fine with that. I think we chose the 31st as just kind of a date that kind of made sense before the official fire season and when weather changed. I think certainly if we get direction today and we start formulating this, we can definitely do an update as we get closer to the end of the year with saying like, okay, we think we might be able to move it up or not. But I think it depends on our ability to obtain resources to help us manage that expectation, as well as the service providers and just sort of getting it all up. Because yes, I'm one person right now.
Yes.
And I know the county staff is limited too with everything else we have going on. So I do want to be sensitive to our own ability to get that done, as well as I don't want to move people when it's a clement weather or anything other situation that might harm them even further.
Yeah.
Could you just
Depends on what it
clarify
is.
what the expectations are around what closure means? So for instance, some people have vehicles that can't be moved or property that they can't easily move and they want access to it. So is like the expectation May 31st is all property and vehicles are out, or is it people are out but may still have access to retrieve property, or what does that mean?
I think our goal would be to have their identified personal property out as well as the individual. So we would place their personal property in that identified storage area at that rock crusher site too. So the only thing that remains is cleanup efforts and any sort of mitigation for fire season that we would want to do. So our preference would be to get in there and get out their personal property with them. So I would like to do a 60-day, 30-day, and a 72, and we would start working with them. Ideally, we're going to let them know before the end of the year, before really winter hits, that this is what is going to happen, and we can start working with them earlier than just the 60 or 30-day notice.
Yeah.
And that is my ultimate goal, as we start to give ourselves really 6 months.
And
Go ahead, Mary.
I remember with the tunnel removal, in order to remove under state statute on government land, you have to have a policy in place, and we're working on a management policy for outside of the city's UGB. And even with that policy where we do give plenty of notice, we did get some 88 claims, which delayed some of the closure, which is probably likely again for removal. So I completely agree with Matt, you and the mayor. You set a date, but the expectation that everything will happen on that exact date, especially if you're looking at the fire season, you probably need to build some flexibility in there.
And I
for the
just, since you're
reality.
gonna be maybe going this winter, if you're going this winter and saying a date, I think that needs to be the solid date and we don't change that. So yeah, that's why I would keep it at 31st, but I appreciate wanting to try to move it up. Go ahead, Councilor Campbell.
Yeah, the timeline, I think, really allows that the timeline shows the first actual notice is 2 full months before, this is not people getting 72 hours and trying to move. According to this timeline, it's going to be 2 full months of working with people. So ideally, the 72-hour notice is only going out to a handful of stragglers who have still, right? So
Exactly. Our hope is really by the time we get out of winter, we're at 10 camps or less that we are addressing. And that is more of a much more hands-on and personal approach with them. And
so with that, I think I'm saying I'm fine with the 31st.
I think I'm more concerned about add services West Side in November, add security. I mean, is that saying we think we're gonna have the RFQ done by then and these services
Not-
available by November?
sorry.
Because that's definitely not a realistic.
Yeah, I think the services related to service providers and the housing assistance, I think that will probably end up taking longer if we have to go through a full process. If we're talking about the expansion of the hygiene stations and the security, because county has already have them in place, that procurement process can be expedited. And we would probably pursue that.
There's an opportunity to leverage existing contracts and leverage that procurement process is kind of noted in this action item so that we're not adding more process. We can just build off of what we've already done. Yeah.
On the final bullet, related to fire fuel reduction,
Mhm.
It seemed there's been some discussions and requests for the community to look harder at other things like fire breaks and just if this should be a little bit more broad in scope, that we're both evaluating and continuing to coordinate on fuel reduction and other fire risk reduction strategies, that we really take a full look at that. And that's partly what we're getting back as we ask staff to come back to us with a full plan on how we're going to implement
Part of
this.
the management.
Yeah.
Policy. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, Councilor Riley. I'd like to see a lot more specifics around that. It's such an important item. We've been hearing from residents at recent council meetings, and I'd like to see more particular bullets on that too.
So I just put some language there, another fire reduction strategy is part of the management policy or management
Right.
plan, actually.
Yeah, because as Mary said, we're going to be coming back with specific land management policies and that's where a lot of those details are going to live. So we just want to direct staff to do that today.
Right.
Okay, great.
Can I just, Mayor, I'm sorry, I just want to just jump in very quickly. For those of you that listened to the Board of County Commissioners meeting yesterday morning, I don't want us to look past the legal land use issues. We need to begin to work on that immediately because that may be the first step we need to take in order to take the additional steps. Not that we shouldn't have all these goals and deadlines and timelines. And as a county staff, we're going to implement the board's direction. Absolutely. I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that and that coordination begins as fast as possible.
Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, Carl.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I want to be sure the commissioners and county staff understand the advice that we've given our clients so that we're all really clear, because I went to the work session and I completely understand county staff's concerns about EFU land and open space and conservation land. So I want to state right here, we are not saying, the legal department of the city is not saying that homeless facilities can be sited on EFU land under state land use law. What we are saying, and this has been our consistent position where I think we have something of a differing of opinion, is that under House Bill 2006, Section 6 has a carve out. So let me just read it to you because it's pretty short. Any political subdivision may allow any public or private entity to allow overnight camping by homeless individuals living in vehicles on the property of the entity. So in our opinion, that section of House Bill 2006, which was codified at ORS 195-520, said you can do this without regard to zoning, whether inside the UGB or outside the UGB. Other sections of House Bill 2006 had limitations to inside the UGB or rural residential. So we think the legislature knew how to limit you to UGBs, and they didn't do it for that section. So that's been our view of the way that statute was adopted. We are not saying that that is completely risk-free. It's, like many statutes in Oregon, it's not a total model of clarity, but we think that that section and other sections of House Bill 2006 were codified in different statutes. But that one was put into the 195 and it didn't have a limitation on inside or outside. So we're reading it for what it says, not for what it doesn't say. Our second view is that our safe parking was adopted into our municipal code. At the same time, we adopted transitional housing. We adopted sections on shelters into our land use code. That was intentional. So our view is that this type of siting is not a land use. It's not a waiver. It's simply not a land use decision. We are also aware this has not been litigated. So again, we are not saying any of this is completely risk-free, but we think there are really strong, tenable arguments that we are completely willing to defend. If in the end we are wrong, then we go back to the legislature and we say, write better laws. This happens all the time, right? But you take good positions for good reasons. And that has been our approach and our advice to our client. So I just wanted to be clear, though, it's only vehicles. We are not saying tents, we're, RVs, trailers, vehicles. That is what we can put on Juniper Ridge.
And Matt, what is,
That's our position, and that's what we will work with the county on. So
Right.
I just want to be really clear on what we're saying.
Only vehicles and no RVs?
no,
RV.
yes. all of it.
Vehicles and how we define vehicles, we'll work with county staff on it. So the order as drafted excludes, whether it's a mile or not, the county's order as drafted references safe parking, and it does not include the zones at issue. So we will probably I think both entities should have new orders. We should both have skin in this game, right? So we also think if neighbors, hopefully everybody thinks this solution is better than what we have now, which as Commissioner Dare very passionately is not a good scenario. So we're doing something. We hope the community sees that. Doing something is better than doing nothing. But we can't tell you we're not going to get challenged, but we'll defend it. That's okay. We'll defend it if we get challenged.
Right. So the bullet is to direct staff, as Nick has said, to immediately get together and form the plan on whatever orders we need to
whatever orders
make,
we
whatever new policies we need to make to set ourselves up to then defend that decision, but to move forward at this time.
Best way we can. We'll
Yeah.
make it as defensible as possible. Yep.
But I ask
Other
something
questions?
that's
Yeah.
Yes, please, thank you. It's just related to that. The Gale property, it's the owners themselves that want to rezone that property is why we're not pushing that they don't have to because of 2006, right? Am I right about that? Yes, thank you. Okay.
And it's EFU.
And it's EFU. Yeah, okay.
Property, we're in.
That's a question I have heard is, the Gales are right. Why isn't this happening? They themselves are looking for that zone change, is my understanding.
I think they are. But the county's property is EFU as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
A lot of you out there.
Yeah,
There's a couple, there's a map in front of you that has the zone. OS&C zone.
OS&C zone is another issue.
It's not necessarily a resource land. Okay, so any other comments on the first? Eric, will you read out the first under Juniper Ridge, please?
Right, so this is kind of what I have. So the establishment of a temporary safe stay area with direction to staff to coordinate legal land use siting issues, potentially adopting joint orders. That the right language? Communication and outreach plans, scoping of on-site services, leveraging existing contracts and procurement efforts with a housing connection and intensive case management, a focus on safety and key performance metrics, including a 6-month follow-up. And then the full closure of areas owned by the city and county outside of the temporary safe stay area by May 31st, 2025, and continued coordination on fire fuel reduction and other fire reduction strategies as part of the management plan.
It's actually a monthly follow-up for 6 months so that they don't fall out.
I think Yeah. I
If you
think
wanna
6
get
months
that
was For our metrics to report.
Oh,
back.
okay. So a month, including say that, a monthly.
monthly follow-up. It's a Rick Russell thing where they follow up for 6 months just to make sure that they are still doing okay.
All
And
right.
if they, need some help, then get them some help.
Okay. So I think that we've got that in a good place to maybe have a motion on in a minute, but let's look at the second set of bullets on CHRO coordination. Any questions about both? This is basically saying, asking the CHRO or advocating that the CHRO continue to help with the leveraging all those different funding streams, not necessarily that they're in control of all of them, but that they're helping to understand where each of them can best be used. And
Yeah.
then the Gales property. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea is that, as you see on this sheet of the resources, there's a lot of different funding streams. And how they can be used is very different. And then we have the RFQ projects, and then as well as other projects like the 45 acres in Redmond and other projects around the county. The CHRO to take a sort of a big picture look at all of that and be able to maybe make some recommendations on especially when, we think that capacity is coming online, recommendations to the government or entities here to be able to say, these are recommendations for what should go first, second, third, fourth, and how it should be used. That's what that.
Okay. And then the last bullet is supporting the Gales property. It might be more accurate to say, supporting the request to the CHRO to provide the funding for the Gales property rezone. I think it's a specific action, basically. So any questions or thoughts on those last two bullets that will be part of the motion? Not hearing. Okay. I think we've got what Eric has written and is on the screen, and I think we can reflect it in the minutes. I think in order for both our bodies to pass a motion, we need a motion and second from each body.
Sorry, Mayor, can I
Yeah.
add one more thing to the second group of bullets?
You can bring something up. Yeah, sure.
So the Gales property, while I think there's a lot of potential there, we're also relying on some state land use issues to go the right way and other issues that we don't have control over. And I just wonder if it's important to signal our support for other potential tools that I saw in the CHRO prioritization list, like safe parking. So to the extent, like, hopefully all of these work out really well and really efficiently. I would love to take this opportunity to signal our support for additional tools if we need to audible quickly to, investing what we are planning to invest in, for instance, Gales, into, a large safe parking surge. Because we have a 30% success rate on safe parking potentially.
Is there a way for that first bullet? To
Yeah, so
reflect that?
I actually
Okay.
supporting the request for the Gales property and other projects identified by the CHRO procurement process.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient?
Okay. That's great. Okay, so back to procedure. I think for the record for both of our bodies, we need a motion and second from each body. It's council.
On
wanna
behalf
go
of the city
first?
council, I move that we adopt this today.
And direct staff to take these
Yes,
actions.
direct staff to take these actions.
Second. Moved by Councilor Riley and second by Councilor Campbell. Chair Adair?
Okay, do we have a motion from the commissioners?
I would move on behalf of the Board of Commissioners to accept this bundle of actions outlined on the screen today. And move to approve and commit to those.
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion from the commissioners? Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner DeBonne,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes.
All right, city councilors, any further discussion? All right, we'll go ahead. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, unanimous. Thank you, everybody, for all of the work that went into presenting us and making this plan. Thank you to our county commission and to our city council for working together on this. This is the start, not the end. This is the start.
And thank you to the community that showed up today to
Yes,
pay attention to this and for all your input recently.
All right. So with that main item finished, I think we were going to get a little update on the county landfill. We have about 15 minutes if we want to hear about that.
Oh, anyone that's in the room, you are allowed to come to the county commissioners meetings. We do have 3 minutes at the start of our meeting for public comments, or you can email us. So please do.
Thank you very much.
Tim,
All right.
Now for the exciting stuff, folks.
And folks, if you do want to chat, if we'd ask you to step outside, please, so that we're not making noise. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon,
Oh,
Mayor.
everybody leaving.
Well,
Oh, I thought they were here for me.
No, I thought so too.
hear about this. Okay.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor, Chair, councilors and commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here. For the record, Tim Brownell, the Director of the Solid Waste Department for Deschutes County. There are 2 items that are on the agenda that we wanted to address. The first being the landfill siting process and where we're at. I probably have more slides on here than I really want to speak to. I think you all have probably read the papers and heard the recommendation that the Board of County Commissioners had accepted the recommendation of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee for moving forward with the Moon Pit site, which is a Hooker Creek aggregate mine located on the eastern edge of the Badlands Wilderness. I will kind of click through a couple of quick things here. Can you all see a screen or?
Oh, yeah, it's really hard for us to see.
Okay.
do you have those?
For ones, we would love.
Thank you,
those.
Tim, if we can pass those out.
Just quickly in terms of timeline, the board actually approved the recommendation in July. We are now in the process of having initial purchase agreement discussions with Hooker Creek, as well as finalizing a recommendation to our Board of County Commissioners of a consulting group to work on the next phase of the siting process, which we expect is going to take about 3 years, between 3 and 5 years, to get through the actual siting, permitting, land use entitlement components of the process before we're even able to put a shovel in the ground to modify the site. So we're getting close. Currently, our landfill, not landfill, due to conditions of the economy where we are not experiencing quite the waste growth that we have been anticipating. We originally thought that our landfill would hit capacity at the end of 2029. Right now, it's forecasted to be early to mid 2031. So we have a little bit of time that will hopefully give us that space that we need to get through this process. I'll go to page 5 or 6. I wanted to reiterate the kind of the depth of effort that consultants went into and staff and the Solid Waste Advisory Committee went through. There were 14 areas of investigation, from cost to environmental assessments, geology, geotechnical, cultural resources, were all part of the consideration for what ultimately came forward as a recommendation for the appropriate site for the county to move forward with. One thing I want to kind of.
You keep talking.
Oh, okay. Well, one thing I want to direct you to is the pictures. This one here is of the Moon Pit site. One of the key considerations that the SWAC was looking at was the fact that the Moon Pit site is a current active aggregate mine. It's disturbed property. The use of that site as a landfill is a potential reclamation activity for that. If you do an aggregate mine, you are going to have to do some reclamation of that land. So we will be doing a code amendment to have with the county to move forward with solid waste as the appropriate reclamation activity for this site. The other site that we looked at was as a finalist site was the Roth East site, which is at the base of Pine Mountain. This was a site that was undisturbed, and that was a significant consideration for the Solid Waste Advisory Committee in terms of their deliberations and concerns about that location. So ultimately, when we looked at costs, we looked at environmental impact, when we looked at impacts on residential communities, et cetera. After having 1,500 public comments through the process, the Solid Waste Advisory Committee and comments from multiple organizations within the Central Oregon, from the University of Oregon to Audubon Society, Land Watch, Central Oregon League of Conservation Voters, ONDA. All of those organizations made comments on this. The recommendation that came forward was to move forward with the Moon Pit site. In addition to that, the Solid Waste Advisory Committee made a couple other recommendations, and those were to work with stakeholders to develop and implement a robust and comprehensive mitigation strategy that reflects community values to minimize impacts on area wildlife and recreation, as well as to prioritize waste prevention, recovery, and move as quickly as possible to implement those strategies to reduce overall costs and greenhouse gas emissions of the new landfill. So it was kind of a three-part recommendation that Solid Waste Advisory Committee made to the board, and the board accepted those recommendations and directed staff to move forward in all three of those directions: the Moon Pit site, increased diversion, and work with stakeholders on robust and enhanced mitigation. So with that, I'll answer any questions relative to the landfill siting.
It was on.
It's kind of deja vu. We were in this room.
Right.
Usually a lot more people out there.
Right.
For a while.
End of a process and beginning of another long process.
Exactly. So yeah, that was the end of the beginning. And now we're moving into a much longer process, and the updates on that will be fewer and far between, but there will be quite a robust public process, prescribed public processes for the land use, code amendments, for DEQ permitting, as well as potential NEPA on the right-of-way that we're going to be seeking from a right-of-way transfer through BLM property. So there will be many public processes ahead.
Thank you for the update.
Yep.
And then are you
We
talking about the
We
franchise?
have 5
stuff?
minutes. Do you want to do 5 minutes on waste
But-
or so on waste haulers?
Yeah, let me do that. I'll do it very as
Irwin is here. I'm sure he
Yeah.
wants to.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so are members from Republic Services. So we've been working with your staff as well as staff in the city of Redmond. City of Sisters and Lapine are also interested, but the primary folks we're working with at this point to draft a potential new franchise agreement to govern the franchise haulers and the services that they provide. With the city of Bend and the county, how it currently, these are franchise agreements that were, I think, originally crafted in the 70s. They really are two-page agreements that outline the areas that are to be served by the haulers and that they have the exclusive right to collection. It's through county code, city code that we prescribe kind of the nature of the relationship and the nature of the work. Those are pretty old city and county codes and have not been contemporized to what is now the current situation with haulers in our communities. We had local haulers, people who lived in the community. Now we're dealing with national haulers with Waste Connections and Republic Services. And so the nature of the relationship has changed to a degree. But also how do we get responsive service is a question. So we're looking at developing a franchise agreement that does address a number of issues. The key piece that we're looking at is service requirements. But another one is flow control. And under a franchise agreement, we really can direct the flow of different materials to different facilities. And as the county is looking to develop and invest $65 million or so in a landfill, we're looking at the development of recycling, processing infrastructure, new compost facility to deal with all the organic and fire reduction materials that are being collected, as well as the processing and recovery of construction demolition debris, which makes up about 40% of our waste stream. We're right now diverting about 26% of our waste, between 26 and 28% of our waste stream here. We do need to invest in new infrastructure and facilities and programs if we are looking to meet the county and state prescribed goals of 45% diversion or recovery of our waste stream.
When is that 45% supposed to be achieved? Like yesterday?
2025.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry, does
Go
that
ahead.
include recyclable materials when you say diverted?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Not a regulatory target that comes with penalties and
No, it's goals established by the state for this region. It's also a goal that was established under the county's solid waste management plan. So yeah, it's so as we look at, the recommendations that were made by the SWAC relative to increased diversion, as we look at the development of a new solid waste landfill facility, we do feel that we need the ability to direct the flow without that ability being contested. And there's case law that could direct it either way. So that's one of the key components from the county's perspective as we're looking at these major investments. And then there are issues around how do we make sure that we're getting accurate reporting on service as well as financial reporting. We also want to make sure that we have the kind of prescriptive measures around controlling the rates and making sure that those rates are within the range of profitability that is both acceptable to the communities as well as the haulers. So all those elements are addressed within that franchise agreement. In addition to that, what we're looking at is the development of a intergovernmental agreement in which the county would assist, support, and actually conduct much of the administration of these franchise agreements, overseeing the service complaints, making sure that the education and outreach components are being met as described by state law under Opportunity to Recycle Act, as well as the implementation and adherence to the Recycling Modernization Act, which is coming into play July of 2025. So there is, we think that there's efficiencies for the counties to take this on as opposed to every city having redundant staff to do it. The agreement does have very clearly prescribed, or would have very clearly prescribed responsibilities of the county, that the cities would still retain control over rates, over service areas, ability to modify service areas if needed, the ability to declare default or to move into a new franchise agreement to terminate under the current terms. So those are the areas that we're going to be working on. The timeline for this, which is towards the end of the packet, And there are issues around conflict resolution, around how we would amend the IGA. All of those would be addressed within the agreement. But then the timeline is looking at, we've been working with your staff for really the past year on the general basics and need or desire for a universal franchise agreement that is very similar throughout the county. That we are hoping to have done by the end of this month or at some point next month. And then over the next 5 months after that, start to work with the haulers on negotiating the agreement itself. What this agreement is not imagining doing is ending what is called the evergreen component. So it wouldn't put a term on the agreement. It would maintain the evergreen, which is important to the haulers, very important. And what we're asking them to do is step into a new agreement with some other more prescriptive components than what they're used to. There may be a challenge in getting them to the agreement, into agreement. We don't know until we get into it. And it may be at those points that we're going to need to come to council and to the board to see what level of pressure we're going to need to exert back as we negotiate. So those are risks that we're going to have to address as we go through it. The haulers are aware of this and have been talked to about some of the various components and the need and desires of the cities and the county as we move into this. Based on the outcome of those negotiations, if we're successful with the development of a new franchise agreement, then we will complete the intergovernmental agreement draft, and all of those we're anticipating coming to the city councils as well as the Board of County Commissioners in the spring of next year for implementation in July, which is also the same time of the implementation of the Recycling Modernization Act. So that's it in brief. And we'd be happy to continue to work with your staff and do any work sessions with commissioners and city councils as you deem you would like and as your staff directs.
This
Thank
is
you,
a
Kim.
good project. I think it's going to make it more efficient and good to get the update on it. Any questions? Anybody?
I do think it's fascinating that the landfill now has 2 more years. Because when I was first in office in 19, they said we had 10 years. So that was, so
Done a good job.
yeah,
keeping
you're
things off
doing a
the
great job,
landfill.
Kim.
Thank you so much. That was the last
Thank
item
you.
on our agenda.
Great.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Not too bad. We're only 4 minutes over.
We were good. We did it.